in which the preservation of political authority was given priority over the rights of citizenship. And therefore we have this unstable situation, and it's exploded, and we have therefore this young group of kids now growing up in this very unusual situation, and what they're seeing around them is a perplexing combination of their citizens, their older citizens, their parents or their neighbors or their older siblings, who are either fighting in the streets, trying to flee, or just staying at home and complacently putting up with the reality that they could not change the prevailing political and economic order, and they just have to accept it. The problem with that is that the drivers, every single driver of the uprisings and the discontent that you could start identifying starting in the 1980s, every single one of those drivers today is worse than it was in 2010. When the uprisings started. In Egypt alone, there have been around 9 million people born in the last 5 years. 9 million. They're all kids. These are the people that you're looking at. There's no way that the Egyptian system, as it operates now, can forget about the 9 million new kids. There's no way the Egyptian system can deal with the other 81 million Egyptians, to feed them, to give them jobs, to give them good housing, give them medical care, quality education. No way. It's out of the question. And we're seeing now the second phase of discontent in Egypt expressing itself in peaceful strikes and also in violent demonstrations and violent attacks by some extremist groups. So you have this very perplexing situation that shapes the life of young people. And the most important point about youth, which I'll touch again at the end, is that there seems to be no real consensus among the people who do scholarly research, among the NGO analysts, among academics, among people who work with children. There seems to be no clear consensus about the combination of factors that create the multiple discontents and grievances in the lives of young people, and the relationship of the different factors. For instance, poverty, poor education, low job opportunities, lack of accountability, crony capitalism, rampant corruption by the private sector and the government. There's a range of political and economic and social and sometimes cultural issues like denial of cultural identity. We don't know still the real relationship between these material and political factors, and this is one of the issues that needs to be addressed. But this is the first generation today that is socialized in this very unusual context. So one of the first things that we need to do is to understand what does it mean for a 7 or 9 or 12-year-old child, let alone a 15 or 20-year-old. Even the young kids who don't explicitly get into politics, they live in this environment. They're at home, they see it on TV, they see it in the neighborhoods, they go out and they talk to their friends. So this is, I think, the first order of priority. And all the elements in the lives of these young people, virtually all of them, are either stagnant or regressing for the majority. There are small pockets of excellence, of entrepreneurship, of dynamism, of creativity, of self-awareness, of self-expression, of confidence, of maturity, of wealth creation. There are small pockets, and you see them around you here in this part of Amman. You go to the 3rd, 4th, 5th circle. You see them in Hamra Street in Beirut. You see them in Zamalek in Cairo. These are pockets that probably account for 10-15% of the Arab world. And the other 85% is in deep trouble. The local economy is having problems. The regional and international economic links of the region are in trouble. The national political systems have not changed except for Tunisia. Has there been no significant change, small little partial reforms. The quality of education, job training, private sector investment, foreign investment, all of these major trends are either stagnant or negatives. And let me give you just a few figures that illustrate the problem, the nature and quantity or scale of these problems that define this society in which the young people are growing up today in the Arab world. I'm talking about the Arab world. I'm not talking about Turkey or Israel or Iran. And keep in mind that 15% of the Arab world is fine. They're doing great. And I'm sure you talk to them and they tell you about entrepreneurship and they tell you about private investment, and all that is correct. But 85% of the Arab world is not fine. It's in deep trouble, and they're the people who are fleeing, joining Islamist groups, joining rebel groups, fighting their governments, breaking away from norms of authority, whether it's the family or the community or the religion or the state, and trying to come up with something that responds to their needs. So let me give you just a couple of quick statistics that show the magnitude of this. In April of last year, UNICEF did another study that showed that there was 21 million young people, children and adolescents, out of school. That figure now is probably around 24 million, given the wars in Yemen and Syria, probably 24, 25 million. These are kids who should be in primary or secondary school, and they're not. They're out working, they're whatever they're doing. And that figure is probably increasing. The main reason that explains this, according to the research, is the low education quality, the low standards of educational teaching, of instruction, and the low quality of the school environments. So there's nothing wrong with the kids, but there's something wrong with the system that tries to teach them, especially in the public schools. This cohort of children now that is between the ages of 5 and maybe 15 or 18 is, to a large extent, condemned to a lifetime of poor educational quality, low professional capabilities, lack of creative entrepreneurial thinking, and therefore they're probably going to perpetuate what some of their parents have experienced in the last 15 years, which is a steady but slow decline into poverty or the edges of poverty, marginalization, vulnerability, and ultimately political despair. And what drove the Arab uprisings, what pushed people over the edge, was the sense of helplessness. It wasn't just being poor, it wasn't just living in an autocratic society. It was the feeling in the late 2000s, 2005, 2010 was that critical moment, when millions of people, like Mohammed Bouazizi, who set himself on fire to spark this process, millions of people around the Arab world suddenly realized that there was no chance that they were ever going to improve their life conditions, however much they went to school or went to work. The highest unemployment rate for the last 20 years has been with educated high school and college graduates in the Arab world. People realized about 10 years ago that there was no chance that they were ever going to get out of the poverty that they were inherited from their parents and their chronic vulnerability and marginalization, and they wouldn't accept it. And what they did is what they did, the uprisings. A study of educational outcomes that was done last year by Brookings Institution, which had data from 13 country studies in the Arab world, showed that about half of the kids in school are not learning. They cannot do basic literacy and numeracy. This is quite extraordinary. These are kids in school. So that's why you have so many who are out of school, because they're wasting their time. So they drop out and they work, and if they can get $5 a day, that's much better. A study by Ishaq Diwan, a Harvard scholar who's now at the University in Paris, showed that the educational systems not only don't provide young Arabs with the tools and the mindsets they need to learn and improve, but that also the educational system plays a role in making children less happy. That's the term he uses. Less happy than adults and less happy than children in other parts of the world. And that the education system has a role in making Arab youth less tolerant socially and religiously. And therefore, schools are not, by and large, are not transmitting to youth the values and social skills and capabilities that these kids need to become productive, happy, safe, and useful adults. ILO statistics, you know, they talk about unemployment. The statistics are provided by governments, and they're notoriously underreported. But the actual statistics say that Arab unemployment is around 10%. It's probably closer to 15 or 20, and this is almost double the global rate. And youth unemployment for non-oil states, because Kuwait, UAE, they have their own parameters. But youth unemployment in non-oil states is around 15%. According to the government statistics, it's actually around 25%, 30%. So we have serious problems that are structural problems. In Syria, in the last 10 years, a study by a Syrian scholar showed that around 300,000 Syrians every year, went looking for paid employment. They left the farms or they grew up and entered the workforce. About 300,000 every year sought work. About 65,000 found work. Quite a small percentage. About 65 out of 300,000 found work. And only 8,000 had formal work contracts. In other words, the majority were working without contracts. They were working informally. They had no contracts, no guaranteed wage, no social protection, no social security, no retirement, no health insurance. They had no protections whatsoever, and this is one of the biggest problems in the region, which is the informality of labor. About 65% of new entrants to the labor market in Egypt, according to an Egyptian credible study, about 65% of new entrants go into the informal sector. What does that mean? It means they wash car windows, they sell gum in the streets, they sweep somebody's floor in front of their home, they carry sacks of potatoes in the market, they wash dishes, they do anything to earn $4 or $5 a day if they can earn that. And this is, again, structurally, this is the environment in which these young kids are growing into. So there has to be significant focus on improving the environment, because otherwise trying to deal with individual kids with all of the good technology, science, and pedagogical experience that is available to you and to thousands of your colleagues around the region, only about maybe 10% of young people will actually benefit from these interventions, whereas the overwhelming majority will fall victim to these very problematic trends. World Bank surveys have shown recently, there's been two very good studies that were done just a few months ago. They're on the World Bank website. And they're a kind of mea culpa by the World Bank, which finally admitted that they totally missed the grievances and the widespread despair around the Arab world that led to the uprisings, because they were just measuring GDP per capita in Tunis and Egypt, which were the two rising stars of GDP per capita performance for the World Bank and the IMF in the late 2000s. And then, of course, those two countries where the GDP was rising fastest were the two countries where the uprisings broke out. And they've recently now gone back and re-examined how they measure not just economic conditions, but the human conditions, the conditions of people in these societies. And there's a realization now that the combination of material issues like housing, water, jobs, income, and non-material political issues or human rights issues or citizenship rights issues, that combination is heavily tilted at one level to the material issues, that people really went out onto the streets mainly because they needed work, they needed money, they needed water, they needed the basic material needs of life, but they also understood that they weren't getting those things because of the lack of political rights that they were enjoying, and the prevalence of corruption and crony capitalism in these societies. And Egypt and Tunisia were like poster children of corruption and crony capitalism. And they saw this incredible wealth. And you see it in every country. You see it here, you see it in Beirut, you see it in Morocco. Massive wealth, tremendous investments by rich people and other rich Arabs and foreign corporations and hedge funds and private equity funds and third world development funds, all these incredible sources of billions and billions of dollars that are reaching about 10% of these populations and not reaching the masses of people. And they see this, and they're no longer willing to acquiesce in their own marginalization and not just their own marginalization, but the critical element, again, I repeat, which was the turning point, where individual human beings realize that they will never get out of this situation, that their children will be just as poor, marginalized, and helpless as they are, and they wouldn't put up with it. So understanding these relationships between your living conditions, the opportunities you have, and the future ability to change, that combination of factors is really something now that we understand better, but still needs much more work. The second point I want to make is that to do anything about this that's useful, we need to do two things, I think, based on my experience of 45 years now of living and writing about and covering and dealing with these issues in the Arab world. We need, first of all, to actually listen to young people. And it doesn't mean to listen to them only when there's a conference or when there's a head of state who comes or when CNN does a special report. It means listening to them every day. And it means going out of the capital. When we did a report about youth in Jordan about 10 years ago when we were here, my wife and I, we had a company and we did a study for the UNDP on youth in Jordan, and we went to Mafra and we went to Karak and Tafil, we went way out, and Palestinian camps and rich neighborhoods in Amman, and we found the same grievances everywhere. Everybody was complaining, all the youth were complaining about the same thing, that they were not treated fairly, they didn't have equal opportunities, nobody was listening to them, and they were constrained by their families, by their social forces, by their political order, and by their economic system. So first thing is to listen to young people seriously, because what we found was that the grievances of youth very accurately reflect the grievances of adults. The only thing different is young people speak out more openly, and they're willing to immigrate, whereas older people are not so much. And the second thing is to address the issues that youth complain about in a political and economic context. It's not enough just to create a job training program or to try to train some teachers, which people have done for the last 40 years, and the results are, the conditions are worse now than they were 40 years ago. So there needs to be political and economic and social progress done at the same time. And the study we did with UNICEF ourselves just about 6 years ago, it's called A Generation on the Move. It's available on the UNICEF regional website. It's a study of youth all around the Arab world. And basically it said, I have about a minute left, but it essentially said that this was done in 2009, 2010, just before the uprising. And it essentially showed that young people have grievances, they have complaints, but they're not becoming revolutionaries, they're not becoming violent, they're not fleeing or becoming criminals. They're creating their own parallel worlds in the internet, in the marketplace, in the mall, at the mosque, in the neighborhood. So young people are adapting to these conditions by creating their own worlds as well as they can. And the last point I would say, the issue of recommendations and policy linkages, is that we need to understand, I think, three things. First of all, the drivers of discontent. What are the range of issues that young people actually suffer from? Not what we think they suffer from, what they suffer from. And we can get that very easily by listening to them, because then they're also putting it out there on the web. The second thing is, what are the priorities in the minds of young people as well as adults? Is it jobs? Is it money? Is it fresh water? Is it an independent judiciary, free media? What is it? Less corruption? And the third thing is the perceptions in the minds of youth and adults of what causes somebody to go over the edge when their grievances accumulate and become so great that they take that final step. They decide to flee to Europe, to go join Islamic State, to go join the Muslim Brotherhood, to go and join their tribal leader and create a tribal unit instead of a political unit. What are the drivers of citizenship or lack of citizenship? And how do people respond to their grievances and their stresses? In other words, the subjective well-being of people, of young people, how they perceive their condition, is probably the number one issue that we need to study together. And my last sentence is that in studies, again, done by many reputable scholars, show that in the period of 2009-2010, the Arab countries that showed the greatest amount and quality of discontent among their citizens were Egypt, Iraq, Tunisia, Syria, and Yemen. And those are the countries where you have the most violent kinds of events going on today, because citizens in those countries were not satisfied, and they were not satisfied by a combination of political and economic issues which impact the young people today much more than they did 10 or 20 years ago. Because 10 or 20 years ago, people felt they had a chance to improve. Today, that sense is largely missing from 85% of the people in this region. So I need to stop there. Thank you very much, and I hope this has been useful, and I'd be happy to answer questions or hear your comments.
Thank you very much. It was very, very stimulating, and appreciate that.
I think we used all the time.
Yes. So I wanted to thank Rami Khouri for his excellent remarks, and we've sort of used up our time very well, hearing from you about the complexity of the situation, and but we don't want to lose the opportunity to ask you questions, so we would like to propose that in the closing session, we also use that time to keep our questions and pose them to our keynote speaker, so we can continue to move forward, especially because he said listen to the youth, and that's the session that's coming up shortly. So moving to the next session, I'd like to introduce Amalia. Amalia is a consultant and a member of the forum, and will be talking to us about communications and technology, right? Okay.
So, hello everyone. I will moderate the session. I will not talk, but I will maybe first say that it's a real pleasure to moderate the session on communication and technology, because it's a nice continuation for those of the four members who attended the Prague meeting, where we started. I think we had a really exciting session where we tried to imagine how we could use technology and communication. At Prague, we discussed the vulnerability of children. I think, in conflict, we're in the same situation. So I think what is nice about this session is that it will be, I think, even more practical, and some of the dreams we started to dream in Prague, we can see how they can come true. So to help with this, I would like to invite a really fascinating speakers and presentations to the stage. So I'd like to invite Larry Aber, from a forum member from the New York University. I'd like to invite a youth student, Mohammed Abdul Rahim. Please come to the stage. I'd like to invite Nada Elatar from Sesame Street, and Janine Zakaria from Carlos Kelly McClatchy visiting lecturer at Stanford University. So our first speaker or presentation, it's a combination of two things, will be Larry. We are going to share with you a video that was prepared by IBM, where you will see a very interesting iPad app that has been deployed in refugee camps. And Larry Aber, who was involved in this project with IBM, the IBM folks who will be presenting in the video were not able to come to this meeting, but Larry, who's involved with this project, will give us a little bit of context, and then please show the video of IBM Watson to all of us. Please, Larry.
Thank you, Amalia, and thank you, Rami Khouri. It's a little jarring to follow that very powerful, sobering analysis of the conditions, historical and political, in the region, but I'll pathetically try to make one link. One of the things that Mr. Khouri emphasized was that the main reason a study found that 21 million young people were out of school in the region, maybe 24 million now, was, quote, how low the standards of education and teaching and instruction are, and the low quality of learning environments. That's exactly the kind of issue that colleagues at the International Rescue Committee and we at NYU, with many others, have been working on over the last 5 years. Historically, we've been working with 350 schools in post-conflict areas in the eastern Congo that has experienced civil war and mass disruption and conflict that's almost equivalent to experiences in the Middle East for the last 20 years. And we've been working on integrating social emotional learning principles, healing principles into the provision of education in classrooms and schools in exactly the kind of way that Mr. Khouri was indicating to improve students' well-being, their subjective sense of well-being as a path into doing work. What we found is how challenging that work is without technology. So we work in schools that it takes a long time to get to, but walk and by moped, and there's huge lack of infrastructure, information infrastructure. So communications and technology are critical. This has driven us to begin to collaborate, partly through the forum's marriage, with the IBM Data Sciences Group to develop an app. The app recognizes that all stakeholders working to provide quality education programming face really critical challenges of the type I was describing in the Congo. Teachers experience incredibly difficult work conditions. I could detail them, I won't. They have a challenge providing instructional support and social emotional support. Humanitarian practitioners who are trying to support the teachers have very difficult times getting to places and being there often enough. Researchers have a hard time living with the families and the communities and the children long enough to collect reliable data. All that sucks. That's a technical term, sucks. I want that to be in the national proceedings. As cell phones and internet become increasingly available, however, we can change this. So what you're about to see is work that Global Ties at NYU, the International Rescue Committee, has begun with IBM's Data Science Group to develop a prototype for a cell phone or tablet-based application that can serve multiple functions. We're not going to talk about the My Classroom function. There's part of it that would allow real-time data collection and exchange about what's going on in classrooms. We're instead going to talk about the Teacher Learning Circle part. The Teacher Learning Circle is supporting a virtual form of teacher professional development. And while this has been developed for explicit use by IRC and us, we're now extending this kind of work to Sierra Leone, Niger, and northern Lebanon. We do think that it has great application for education practices in many other contexts around the world. So with that intro, I think we're ready for the video. Will the video appear there too? So.
Hi, my name is Kush Varshney. I'm a researcher at the IBM T.J. Watson Research Center in Yorktown Heights, New York. And what I'm going to be telling you about is joint work with Sashka Mojsilovic. So whenever you're doing any sort of scientific research, whenever you're trying to innovate or really address any sort of problem in the world, the hardest part is oftentimes identifying the right problem that's worth solving. And you can imagine that when there's lots of stakeholders involved, each with their own point of view and each with their own anecdotal evidence, it's very difficult to really converge onto what the most pressing problem is that actually is doable and can actually develop a solution for. So in this, the rest of the time today, what we'll be doing is taking you through a demonstration that we've developed in conjunction with Carly Tubbs from the NYU Global Ties for Children. And what we're going to be showing you is how in a refugee camp, several different stakeholders, the teachers that are interested in developing educational materials for the children in the refugee camps, as well as agencies, other folks, researchers, and so on, can come together, describe their own point of views, as well as be supported by cognitive agents who are these smart sort of technologies that are listening to these online conversations and suggesting data sets or analyses or apps that are relevant to bring that discussion forward in order to really come to calls for action that are worth solving. So on to the demo. The International Rescue Committee and NYU's Global Ties for Children are looking for new ways to improve the quality of education in informal tent schools serving Syrian refugee children in Lebanon. So in this demo, we'll show how a tablet app can help facilitate that. And in particular, we'll take you through a demo through a story where the characters are the International Rescue Committee, IRC, NYU Global Ties, Jeff, an IRC Education Coordinator in Lebanon, Paul, an IRC Senior Technical Advisor, Carly, an NYU researcher, and then several teachers in the non-formal classes in Lebanon, as well as teacher trainers. So when we look at the screen, the first thing we see is that there's two options. One is My Classroom, and that's for the user who's one of the IRC informal teachers to manage her classroom, so things like attendance, grades, and so on. But the thing we want to focus in on is teacher learning circles. So teacher learning circles are of two types. Sister TLCs are ones in which teachers can talk to other teachers and other conversants